The important role of open-source intelligence in the Ukraine war. SARS, open-source intelligence is piercing the fog of war in Ukraine, The Economist. On May 29, 1982, BBC reporter Robert Fox has just witnessed 36 hours of fierce fighting between Britain and Argentina at Goose Green, a remote location on the Falkland Islands in the South Atlantic. It was the decisive battle of the war and the British won. But although he wanted to report the news immediately, it took Mr. Fox 10 hours to get a satellite phone on the warship. It took another 8 hours for London to decode his message, and so the story was not broadcast until 24 hours later. Television journalists are worse, Mr. Fox said. It took 10 days for their frames to arrive in England. 40 years later, when the city of Kherson in southern Ukraine was liberated in November 2022, news spread within hours, if not minutes. Images circulating on Telegram showed Ukrainian soldiers entering the city center and Ukrainian flags hoisted on buildings. A network of amateur analysts on Twitter tracked Ukraine's advance, almost in real time, by geolocating photographs. They compared trees, buildings, and details in the photos with satellite images from Google Maps and other satellite sources. The rise of open-source intelligence, also known as OSINT, has changed the way people consume news. Before the war, commercial satellite imagery and videos of Russian military convoys on TikTok allowed journalists and researchers to corroborate Western claims that Russia was preparing for an invasion. OSINT even predicted when the war would begin. Jeffrey Lewis of the Middlebury Institute in California used Google Maps road traffic reports and found notable congestion on the Russian side of the border at 3:15 a.m. on February 24. "Someone is move," he tweeted. Less than 3 hours later, Vladimir Putin launched his war. Satellite images still play a role in monitoring the war. During the Kherson campaign, synthetic aperture radar, SAR, satellites, which can observe at night and through clouds, captured images of Russia building a pontoon bridge across the Dnieper River before retreating from Kherson. Boats appearing and disappearing as the Russians retreated east, and also the Russian army building new defensive positions along the M14 highway on the left bank of the river. And when Ukrainian drones attacked 2 air bases deep inside Russia on December 5, high-resolution satellite images showed the extent of the damage. Yet while satellites were well suited to cataloging Russian battalions neatly positioned in open fields in January, they were unlikely to capture convincing images of small, dispersed companies over a wide area and often hiding in trenches or bunkers. The most important data repository during the last war was not satellite, but Telegram. Open-source intelligence analysts scoured Telegram channels like Rybar, an account with more than 1 million followers, to collect images, comments from the front lines and the mood of the troops. Rybar is not neutral. Its founder once worked for the press service of the Russian Defense Ministry and is said to have had links to Yevgeny Prigozhin, the boss of the Wagner mercenary group, but it presents its own accounts. Relatively accurate and timely reporting on developments on the battlefield, including Ukraine's blitzkrieg through Kharkiv in September 2022, and often critical of Russian policy. Telegram has become a place to vent anger for Russian ultranationalists who support the war but are dissatisfied with the way the Russian military leadership is conducting the war. Popular accounts have circulated images of Russian soldiers lacking basic equipment. During the Kherson campaign in early October 2022, a Russian soldier account even used Telegram to desperately call for air support. Matthew Ford from the Swedish National Defense University said that the first 10 years of the civil war in Syria produced a total of 40 years of video footage. But in just the first 80 days of the Ukraine war, we have 10 years worth of footage. For the military, which always seeks to keep all activities secret, this abundance of information is a nightmare. In 2019, Russia passed a law prohibiting soldiers from posting sensitive photos or videos. They shut down railway tracking websites just before the war began, losing a valuable source of data. They also tried to hide insignia on soldiers' uniforms and markings on vehicles, to avoid revealing the entire unit's location. By October 2022, the Kremlin began cracking down on rising opposition figures famous on Telegram, such as Igor Girkin, who led Russia's proxy war in Donbas in 2014. But these bloggers still post information as before. After at least 89 Russian servicemen, and possibly hundreds, were killed in a Ukrainian attack on New Year's Day in Makivka, a Russian-occupied town in the Donbas region, Mr. Girkin criticized the incompetence of Russian generals, calling them untrainable. Russia cannot stop the flow of information either. There are a lot of lessons that are learned very slowly, but I think it's on Telegram, where they know the whole world is looking, said Tom Bullock, an OSINT analyst at the intelligence firm Trades. On vKontakty, VK, Russia's equivalent of Facebook, Mr. Bullock said, it's basically as bad as ever. There are a lot of geotagged photos of military bases floating around all the time. This negligence can have fatal consequences. In December, a Russian conscript posted on VK photos of Russian troops stationed at a country club in Sahi, Kherson province. This guy even geotagged the post. Ukrainian missiles soon struck it. But the conscript continued to post, with a video showing the extent of the missile's devastation. In fact, he helped Ukraine assess damage from the field, according to analysis by Rob Lee from King's College London. As Russia mobilizes hundreds of thousands of new recruits, most of whom have little battlefield experience and minimal security training, this vulnerability will increase. Many of them see posting on social media as part of their tour of duty, Mr. Bullock said. He recounted tracking down a Russian conscript sent to Kherson province in June. The diligent soldier posted photos of all the villages he drove through on the way from Rostov, southern Russia, to Kherson, thereby revealing the exact route of Russia's supply routes. There have been efforts to completely shut down or limit OSINT collection, said Hy Sutton, a naval analyst who uses SAR imagery to track ship movements. But OSINT is growing and people, if they are sharp enough, will find new ways. He gave the example of NASA's Fire Information Resource Management System, FIRMS, which uses infrared sensors on satellites to detect active fires. It's designed to track things like wildfires. Now it is being used to identify rocket launches, artillery shells and explosions, allowing researchers to follow developments from the front. Of course, open sources also have limitations. The stream of images emerging from Kherson is actually an unusual phenomenon, partly because excited residents are eager to take pictures and post them on social networks. According to the New York Times, on one occasion, Ukrainian forces targeted a Chechen unit near Kiev within 40 minutes of the video being uploaded to TikTok. But it takes on average 1 to 3 days for an image to spread widely enough to be geologio-caged, according to Andrew Matthewson, OSINT analyst for the Halo Trust, a charity that specializes in demining. Images often appear intermittently when a unit is rotated away from the front lines and has the time and network connection to post. Open sources also entail a form of survivability bias, just as the erroneous lesson from World War II was to analyze only planes returning from missions and not those shot down. The footage we're seeing of this war doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening on the ground, Mr. Lee said. He noted that tanks hit by anti-tank missiles were more likely to be captured on video than those hit by mines. However, all information sources show that most of the losses of Ukrainian tanks came from mines. In a recent talk, General Sir Jim Hawkinhull, who runs Britain's Defence Intelligence Agency until 2022, compared traditional intelligence to assembling a jigsaw puzzle without knowing the complete picture. What is correction? What's happening with open source is we still don't have limits, but have almost infinite pieces of the puzzle. As a result, one can combine an almost infinite number of images. That creates fragmented realities, Mr. Ford said. He is working on an open source narrative for the war and thinks it could be done to what might be considered our intelligence standards, a remarkable step forward for history. Military. But he admits the endless jigsaw puzzle poses serious challenges. One is a matter of self-deception, seeing the war as we want to see it, not as it is. Images of cold and hungry Russian recruits huddled in trenches paint a picture of a chaotic general mobilization. In fact, Western and Ukrainian officials said they were more worried about that the unit was established out of sight. The other issue is seeing what the enemy wants you to see. In the early months of the war, many videos with catchy music showed successive attacks by Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2 drones. But it's a play. Justin Bronk of the RUSI Institute, a research organization, said on a recent podcast, Ukraine quickly realized this was some of the best footage they had, and they used it in a clever campaign. Extremely effective news. Ukrainians came together to archive that footage and continue to circulate it, removing traces of date, time, and location to create the impression that this was still an important event several months later. But despite the limitations, Western intelligence agencies are still very interested in OSINT. Satellite imagery has existed for a long time. The United States has had satellites for more than 60 years, though never so many. But a world in which telegram channels transmit large amounts of battlefield imagery is new and unsettling. Open source contributes about 20% of our current processes, General Hawk and Hull shares, but availability and opportunity mean we have to reverse this ratio. Instead of sprinkling OSINT on secret intelligence, secrets should be the icing on the open source cake. The important thing is that we can put those things together, /